I think the Ukraine-Russia situation is one of those as well, where people have felt the need to take a side, when I think actually you can say both sides, there's concerning issues on both sides. I mean, Putin himself as an invader of a country is concerning. NATO expansion is concerning. Maybe. Financing Nazis in East Ukraine is concerned. These are all, I'm not going to get into what the truth is of the issues, but they're all things that you can be concerned about, and they span both sides. But what I've noticed is there's certain people who, like, for example, with the Nazis in Eastern Ukraine, that's all they're talking about.
And the biolabs.
But they're not actually mentioning any of the kind of issues coming from the Russian side. And I think it's important to get through that notice. It's why I've come off Twitter. I mean, I will retweet shows and I will go in and have a look at what's happening. But as a discussion forum, it's miserably failed because there is no reward for truth finding. There is reward for position taking. There's reward for confirmation bias, and there's reward for audience capture. There is no reward for nuance.
Isn't it? I mean, it's interesting because, like, when you talk to like an economist, they're going to talk about like the problem set, like they'll give you a graph and they'll be like, here are all the elements to this graph, and they'll break them down and say these discrete little elements, each of these like parts of it, they turn into this graph, and this graph tells us this, but these discrete elements of like the math and the study, like these will indicate, like this one indicates how you measure supply, this one indicates how you measure demand, this one indicates like how many cows fart on Tuesday, and like you have these like different sort of like scenarios that they run through, and then they come up with this beautiful graph that tells you something. And that's how like generally it used to be. You could have opinions like, okay, well, yeah, funding Nazis, not a great thing. Yeah, Russia invading Ukraine, not a great thing. I believe both things. Giving guns to the Ukrainians to defend themselves, I like that. Ukraine defending itself, I like that. Like, you can have different opinions within sort of the subset of like the greater umbrella of like, is it good, is it bad? And like in Bitcoin, it's interesting because I've seen this weird willingness to just side. The Russia thing it blows my mind. Bitcoiners are siding with Russia, like wholeheartedly, talking about like the Russian side.
Let's be fair, not all of them.
Correct. I'm a Bitcoiner, right?
But so there's a cohort that will certainly criticize both sides. There's a cohort that the one I find interesting is the cohort who are silent on Russia, but loud on concerning things from the Ukrainian side. So sharing videos maybe that appear to be Russian soldiers being tortured or abused. So they're showing the concern from one side but silent on the other. I find that super interesting.
Well, the thing that I found interesting is the switching of like sort of political positions. Like I'm watching the left talk about how great it is that the Ukrainians are being given guns, which is mind-blowing to me. This is a group of people that doesn't think anyone outside of like the military should have guns. And then I'm watching the right like become pro-Putin in America, and it's very weird. I've never watched such a weird flipping, and it's such a flip from their general position. It makes me wonder if like in the next thing that happens, the next crisis, because we move from crisis to crisis every 2 weeks, right? In the next crisis, are they going to flip back? Like, there's no consistency of opinion. Like, everything is very postmodern at this point. Everyone is kind of like, they have a dartboard and they pick their opinion that week, and then all of them move in a direction, and somehow like all of the right has come to a place where they all support Putin. All of the left is now like pro guns in the hand of Ukrainians, and it's just like this moving, like marching band, and they just kind of like zigzag from like, I can't figure out where people are anymore politically.
I think I know where it comes from, but just to add to that, a funny one. As this show won't come out for a few weeks, but just for context. Where we are, yesterday was the Oscars, and there was a rather interesting incident. I did not have Will Smith slapping Chris Rock on stage on my bingo card. I did not have that one, but watching how people responded to that was super interesting, because some of the people who I put in the camp of pointing out mistakes or things that the Ukrainian army maybe have done and silent or pro-Russia or defending Russia's ideas, also the same people who were saying Will Smith should be arrested for assault.
Really?
Yeah, I saw some of that. Now, what I think is going on here, I think there is a bucket which is considered left, which is globalists, the globalist agenda, mainstream media, Hollywood, etc. And I think if anything feels like it's in that camp, a certain group will oppose it. And anything which is more about being independent away from that, another group support it. So you can say, okay, why would that group support or point out the errors in Ukraine? Because there's that belief that there's a globalist agenda to expand NATO and cancel Russia, right? So they've got to oppose that because they don't want to support the globalists expanding in Ukraine. And everything that's in Hollywood is left. You can't really be it's very hard to be an A-list actor and be a conservative because being a conservative is considered pejorative almost, being a Republican. So they have to oppose someone like Will Smith. Whereas I assume if it had been some kind of like, I don't know, Willie Nelson, maybe he got up and bitched that one, they'd be supporting him. But I think that's where it's coming from.
I'd laugh my ass off if Willie Nelson did it.
I'd laugh my ass off. If Willie Nelson did it.
Very funny. But no, I mean,
do you see what I'm saying?
It's interesting. It's interesting that you correlate those two views because, like, I couldn't even imagine that those, like, whether you believe Will Smith was in the right or not in the right, or he should go to jail or not go to jail. I can't imagine that would be politically like tied. And the fact that you think it is very interesting.
Not for everyone.
Right.
I just noticed a few Twitter accounts talking about that. These aren't even Bitcoiners, but these are large Twitter accounts saying that. And then I went back through their feed and I was just trying to see where their position was on Ukraine, Russia, where their position is on COVID. And for those individuals, there was an alignment.
Well, everything is political now.
Yeah.
And I've discovered that over the years. Like there were things that were just apolitical. Bitcoin was somewhat apolitical. Like you could be a Bitcoiner and not know what was going on in the world. It was fine. No one really cared. You just kind of like live your Bitcoin life, your best Bitcoin life. And I care a lot about like Bitcoin stuff. But like everything is political now. Everything. And I don't know when that kind of started. I mean, like Jonathan Haidt is, I agree with you. He does phenomenal studies. What is it? The Coddling of the American Mind is probably his most well-known. And like, it's very interesting that like generationally things have just changed so much. And I wonder where like all of this is going to lead. A lot of the like the political division right now is so polarizing that just you can't escape it. It's impossible.
Do you think it's a worse issue in the US? Because essentially it's two parties. So there's two teams and there's essentially media, which tends to be pick a team. Yeah. And therefore in life and the world, you essentially are, or groups of people are pushed into that team.
I don't know. I was talking to someone about this yesterday, and what's been odd to me about what is going on is, like, I've seen a lot of people cite what is going on as indication that America itself is in decline. And what's been interesting to me is that what I've been watching feels very global. It doesn't feel like it's distinctly American. It feels like conversations about like white privilege and intersectional like stuff is happening in India, in Nigeria, and France and the UK, and that's
not to the extent to the extent here in the US. What about Australia?
No, I think it's definitely creeping into like general conversation.
Do you feel like the polarization and the
it seems worse here probably, but it's like we were talking about the other day. Like I think the media plays a big role in that. Like in the UK, the media hold politicians to account. And I don't know if that happens the same.
It is interesting because like I've heard a number of like I'll hear people in the UK talking in the news or just the news reports generally, and they are much more centrist, like sort of centered, a little bit more fair. Like in the US, the news is aside.
Well, what they tend to do in the news here, just to echo Danny's point, because we were watching a news report the other day where was it Sky News?
Yeah, Sky News.
Sky News reporter Richie Sunak, who's the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And she went to interview him. And Sky News is traditionally considered more conservative.
I'd say so.
Yeah. And he is the Chancellor for the Conservative Party. She went for him and she was very clear with him, saying to him, you're in the process of regulations and legislation to and sanctions against Russian individuals and companies. Your wife owns shares I might get this slightly wrong, but shares in a company which has an office in Moscow and they've not yet been sanctioned. Do you not feel this is like hypocritical? And he defended himself, looked very nervous, but she was hard on him. And that happens a lot in the UK. What I tend to find with US news, it's more based on getting, if it's a right station, it will tend to bring on right guests, and they tend to use it more of a platform.
Yeah, well,
and the criticism comes from, the critical thing is critical opinion, not hard-hitting questions all the time.
It's kind of interesting.
Am I missing something?
No. News in the United States is an interesting animal because news in the United States has always been very bad since the inception of the country. It's been very propagandistic. We've had John Adams passing the Alien and Sedition Act and whatnot. Like it's always been, it's been a little bit like political. And then we had this sort of like golden era where TV happened, and we had like the 60 Minutes and stuff like that, where they like had, I don't know, 10 maybe to 15 years of really good news, or what they believed to be really good news.
Did you have the fairness doctrine though?
Yes.
Was that good or bad?
It depends. William F. Buckley, the National Review, I believe, used the fairness doctrine, for example, to insist that people are taught in schools that Shakespeare was not the author of Shakespeare's works. So, which is one of my favorite use. I mean, the fairness doctrine is an interesting era in American history because it seems to violate a lot of like sort of our constitutional precepts. I actually think that what's happened recently is that there's been sort of this opening of the opening of the American mind, where like Americans have indicated that they actually do want good journalism. And what's happened is because of the internet and podcasting, there's opened up this entire realm of possibility for people that actually show up and do real news. So, I mean, you can say what you want about him, but Joe Rogan, like interviewing people for 3 hours, having a real conversation, that's real news.
Mm-hmm.
News is taking on a different form, and people aren't watching that drivel because they don't want it. They don't want the 30-second snippets. That's for old people.
But there is a new form of drivel that comes with that as well. Those who are captured by their audience. I think, Tim Paul to me is the opposite of Rogan. He is just a independent version of a Fox News, right? He has his show, but I think he completely appeals to his audience. Whereas Rogan, I believe, is a truth seeker.
I think they would both believe themselves to be truth seekers. I mean, Tim Pool's interesting. I watch both. I mean, I watch Rogan, I watch Tim Pool. I try to watch as much as I can just because I feel like, you get as much information.
Yeah. And
it has been interesting to watch Tim Pool move down this like rabbit hole where like he started out pretty good. And then like, as I watch people move in a direction, it seems like everyone ends up in conspiracy rabbit holes. Everybody. And I don't know how you prevent it.
Well, I mean, I understand that. I understand the draw. And I think there's a couple of reasons that it exists. There is an incentive model for it. Because firstly, you do question things, but you have an audience, therefore, likes the fact you're questioning it. And then you get captured by that. And even...
So you think it's like a sort of a cyclical, like...
It's the same. They have the same revenue model essentially, usually, as the mainstream media.
But everything degrades to rhetoric. Like that's been kind of my observation of all discussion. So like we should talk a little bit about the climate change stuff. That's interesting.
Well, because sorry, the point I was making is I personally feel that draw.
Interesting.
I know if I had a very different set of beliefs, if I was more libertarian, if I was didn't believe that climate change was a human issue, if I thought the majority of COVID was a conspiracy, I know all the guests I can get, and I could feel myself getting drawn into it. This is why we always try and get people on we disagree with to try and balance us, to try and level us, because if you don't, you just get sucked down and down and down.